Why support the free Iranian cause? Well, it really boils down to two principal reasons. The first, as you heard so eloquently from Secretary Chavez, is that it's the right thing to do from a human rights perspective. The second is that it's the right thing to do from a U.S. national security perspective. Following the liberation of Iraq, several U.S. government agencies conducted a thorough investigation of residents of Ashraf and then recognized them as protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. We heard that firsthand this morning from General Phillips. There is no better testimony or source of the facts. From 2003 to early 2009, U.S. forces protected Camp Ashraf from attacks by the Iranian regime. After that, however, Iraqi forces have launched attacks several times on the camp's defenseless residents, killing nearly 50 and injuring over 800. What's Tehran's reaction to these attacks been? Well, it's to praise the Iraqi army for those attacks, and they've asked Baghdad to continue attacking the MEK until their destruction. Now, since these attacks, the situation has become more complicated. You know about last December's UN Memorandum of Understanding, drafted to relocate the residents of Ashraf to Camp Liberty. Since that time, nearly 2,000 residents of Ashraf have moved to Liberty. The Memorandum of Understanding signed by the UN and the government of Iraq explicitly says that Iraq will ensure, quote, the transit locations meet humanitarian and human rights standards. Let's do a brief review of how support of these standards in regard to Camp Liberty are not being followed. The fifth movement of residents from Ashraf to Liberty occurred earlier this month. This was the worst movement in terms of limitations imposed on them by the Iraqi government. Iraq imposed new restrictions preventing the residents to take properties that had already been agreed to. The inspection before they departed lasts more than a week while residents were constantly being harassed by the Iraqi forces. And as a convoy left Ashraf, after an hour, the Iraqis, in yet another violation of their commitment, stopped 6 utility vehicles and returned them back to Ashraf. Then the Iraqis did not allow the residents to transfer special trailers or cars for the disabled, so those individuals were not able to go to Camp Liberty. As we've heard today, Iraqi police are stationed inside the camp, equipped with 11 armored personnel carriers, and dozens of armed police patrol Camp Liberty. And one of the Iraqis instrumental in previous attacks on Ashraf was appointed as the person in charge of Camp Liberty. The UN in repeated statements has emphasized the need for freedom of movement for the residents of Liberty, yet no freedom exists. The legal counsel for Liberty residents is barred from visiting. Water supply continues to be a major concern, and there's a shortage in the camp. Electricity is another significant problem. It's not connected to the national grid, and the residents rely on small generators that are going to be insufficient for the upcoming hot weather. Camp Liberty is really, as you've heard people allude to and state, it's not an appropriate name for what's going on there. Camp suppression is more like it. Reaction from the United States in this entire chain of events was to condemn the attacks against Camp Ashraf and support the UN in its efforts to relocate the inhabitants to camp suppression. But more can and must be accomplished if the United States is to live up to our principles of vigorously supporting human rights. Now, given that U.S. forces are no longer in Iraq, the most effective tool we have in protecting the people of Ashraf, protection that we assured those people in 2004, is to remove the MEK from the list of foreign terrorist organizations. You all know that the United Kingdom and the EU have removed the MEK from their terrorist list, and we need to do the same. Meanwhile, the Iranian regime is continuing to create propaganda that attempts to demonize the MEK, as we saw just a couple of months ago when an Iranian spokesman told NBC the Mossad had been flying MEK members to Israel for training and sending them to Iran to carry out assassinations. This set of untruths was no accident. Just as the support is growing to remove the MEK from the list of foreign terrorist organizations, this fabrication was injected into the media in an attempt to prevent delisting. The Iranian opposition has survived a level of repression that's unparalleled in modern times. From a human rights perspective, it's long overdue to reverse that oppression. Furthermore, the removal of the MEK from the foreign terrorist organizations list would send a signal to the people of Iran that the United States is standing with them rather than with their oppressors. In that Wall Street Journal report today, you may have noticed a quotation by some nameless diplomats that are concerned that the action to delist may upset the current Iranian regime. That's all the more reason to delist now. Unfortunately, their tactics have been too successful. The most significant result being the 97 designation of the MEK by the U.S. State Department as a foreign terrorist organization. However, in reality, the Iranian regime's survival depends on how much it can suppress an increasingly uneasy and critical internal population. The resistance inside Iran is committed to undermining these repressive policies, but a nuclear arsenal would create a more powerful and resilient repressive regime and eliminate any hope for democratic change. This is why the Iranian people, even more than the rest of the world, cannot afford a nuclear-armed Iran. Iran has never been more vulnerable than it is today. Their leaders' fear is that the organized opposition will continue to gain more visibility and international support. Keeping the MEK on the list of foreign terrorist organizations is limiting U.S. national security options unnecessarily, while the Ayatollahs are threatening us and the rest of the world with their nuclear bomb making. Removal of the MEK from the list is in the United States' best interest from a national security perspective. Removal would also send a strong message to the Iranians that their efforts to unseat the radical fundamentalist leaders would no longer be viewed by the United States as terrorism, but rather as an exercise of their legitimate right to change the future. So President Obama, Secretary Clinton, it's time to make this important contribution to the security of the United States and to the world, as well as reiterating your commitment to defend human rights. Remove the MEK from the list of foreign terrorist organizations, and as has been said before, not in 60 days after the last people moved from Ashraf to camp suppression, but now. Thank you very much.
The mullahs are now afraid, more so now than they have been over the past several years. And it's not because they're afraid of maintaining or protecting their nuclear program. I mean, there's going to be negotiations next week with the UN Security Council plus Germany to talk about this. They're confident. They know they can get through this. They've done it before. What they're really afraid of is the threat to the continued existence of their regime, of their rule. And who poses that biggest threat? It's the MEK. And it's twofold, because they know, as well as we all do, what the MEK stands for. It is not a political party looking to usurp authority to take over the country. It is an organization that stands up for human rights, for a denuclearized Iran, for women's rights, and for protection for all, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom from prosecution. That scares the regime, more so than military force of any opposing nation. It's the internal dissent. And they know that if the United States delists the MEK, that sends a message, not just to the world, that this has been a farce in terms of designating them as a terrorist organization, but it sends an equally strong, if not stronger, message to the people of Iran. That democracy stands for something, that human rights stands for something, and that the future of the country is moving in a positive fashion. It may not happen as quickly as we all would like, but that's the message delisting the MEK will send to the mullahs. That's what they're afraid of. like this story about finding weapons buried at the camp. I will guarantee you there will be more stories about weapons found in the camp over the next few weeks. And I think as General Phillips and I were talking earlier, all you need to do is bring in a backhoe, dig a ditch, drop a container in there filled with weapons, cover it up, then invite in your camera crews and say, look at what we found. How do you disprove that? Now, they are clever, they are evil, they have good training, they have good experience. But again, the MOIS plays to the needs and the desires of the mullahs. So it's important to understand that while the negotiations are very important to the Iranians, to the mullahs, they care less about their nuclear program because they know they'll be able to continue it in some shape or form over the years. And unless there are, and I agree the sanctions are working to a degree, but what they're deeply concerned about is maintaining their control. We are again going back to what we did in 1997. We are appeasing a dictatorship. Appeasement does not work with dictators. It never has, and it never will. It is time for the United States to finally and resolutely do the right thing. Do not continue to play into the hands of the mullahs. Do not continue to sacrifice the health and lives of the innocent and law-abiding residents of camps Ashraf and Liberty. Do not allow this travesty of justice to continue. Stand up against the Tehran regime. Stand up for the residents of Camp Ashraf and Liberty. And stand up for the MEK. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's time now that we have a conclusion of today's program, and I want to end where I started. And that's acknowledging the story in today's New York Times that says, with enrichment program a reality, Iranians claim success in stalling. And the second headline from today's paper was about how the U.S. is stalling in taking the MEK off the foreign terrorist list. There is a common theme here today. And the theme is the Tehranian regime that wants to continue to stay in power and create a nuclear bomb to threaten the world is stalling international negotiations to suspend its nuclear activities. At the same time, the United States Department of State and Justice are stalling in taking the MEK, which has made overthrow of Tehran its principal objective. Do you see how this connects? It seems to me that if we're sincere about stopping the Iranian regime's ability to move forward with nuclear weapons, to continue its state-sponsored terrorism, to continue its violation of human rights, we ought to unleash the main opposition group that is designed to try to overthrow this regime and do what is not only in the interest of Iran, but the interest of the world, and that's to bring democracy to that troubled country. Thank you very much.